July 2020. A prison van rumbles down an empty stretch of road. Thick steel doors, blacked out windows. Inside, a prisoner exhales slowly, his wrists bound in cold metal. He doesn't move. He doesn't speak. He's waiting. He's being transported to face justice, but what no one in that van knows, this ride might never reach its destination. Beyond those steel doors, beyond the armed guards, something moves in the distance. A plan, not a plea, not a bribe, an ambush. Calculated, ruthless, the kind that works. The kind that takes power. The kind that takes money. The kind that has worked before. Someone out there wants him free. Someone willing to risk everything to make it happen. And the man behind orchestrating all of it? Matthew Byrne. A name most wouldn't recognise, but in the underworld, he wasn't just a kingpin, he was a ghost. Untouchable, unseen, unstoppable. He moved tons of narcotics, laundered millions in gold, and built a criminal empire so airtight that no one could touch him. Until now. As Byrne's men moved into position, believing they were in control, they failed to see what was coming. A storm already brewing. One they would never escape. The trap was set. The clock was ticking. And Byrne, the man who always stayed ahead, was about to realise he was never in control. But who was worth this risk? Who was important enough for Byrne to gamble everything? To understand that, we need to go deeper. What follows is one of the most explosive takedowns in organised crime. A secret war fought in the shadows. And when you see how it all unravelled, you'll start to wonder, how many more are still out there? This is the story of Matthew Byrne and Beau Devlin, the men who built a £190 million narcotics empire, and the one mistake that turned it to dust. But to understand how it all collapsed, first we need to understand the man who built it, Matthew Byrne. Because men like him don't just appear out of nowhere. They rise, step by step, carefully, deliberately, until one day they believe they're untouchable. Matthew Byrne acted without purpose. He never made a noise. He didn't have to. Power wasn't about being seen. It was about making moves no one could stop. For nearly a decade, he ran operations that made millions, staying behind layers of technology, intermediaries, and untraceable cash. But no one starts at the top. And Byrne? He knew exactly how to climb. For 8 years before his arrest, he moved like a shadow through the narcotics trade. Every shipment precise, every trail erased, every enemy 2 steps behind. If there was money to be made, Byrne knew how to get his cut. And if there was a risk, he knew how to disappear. He was always precise, every move carefully measured, and that's what made him dangerous. In the world of high-level smuggling, trust is currency. But Byrne didn't trust people. He trusted technology. Like many in the underworld, he relied on EncroChat, an encrypted messaging platform criminals believed was impenetrable. Using code names like Slick Valley and Official Cleaner, he sent out commands with the confidence that no one could ever intercept them. His words were encrypted, his tracks erased, no names, no faces, no loose ends. While others flaunted their wealth, Byrne played the long game. No gold chains, no late-night clubs, just assets, clean, untouchable, and built to last. A Jaguar parked outside his home in Sevenoaks. Designer suits, the kind worn by businessmen, not criminals. A house under construction because, unlike most, Byrne was doing more than just spending his money. He was building his future. And yet, for all his caution, for all his meticulous planning, one crack in the system was all it took. The same thing that kept him safe would be the thing that destroyed him. And the irony? It wasn't the illicit substances. It wasn't the money. It was the very thing he relied on to stay invisible. Before his encrypted messages betrayed him, before his empire crumbled, Matthew Byrne ruled the underworld like a ghost. Born and raised in Sevenoaks, Kent, Byrne didn't just operate in the shadows, he was the shadows. No headlines, no police mugshots, just whispers in the underworld. He understood that real power came from staying unnoticed. Instead, he built his career with precision, working in the shadows, far removed from the street-level violence of the narcotics trade. For the police, he was a riddle. They knew his name, they knew his work, but they couldn't touch him. Byrne played a central role in the trafficking of illegal substances, acting as one of the key figures behind the massive shipments that flooded the UK's illicit market. Multi-ton quantities of narcotics moved at his command, and if someone needed firearms, he could source them just as easily. If you're wondering how Byrne could source firearms as easily as he moved narcotics, wait till you see the bigger picture, because his connections ran far deeper than just controlled substances, and the way he built his network reveals just how untouchable he was, or at least he thought so. For Byrne, power wasn't just about staying hidden, it was about control. He understood that wealth wasn't just a reward, it was a message, a silent flex, a warning. But while his success kept him at the top, it also left behind something else, something police would soon piece together. The millions Byrne accumulated weren't in bank accounts, they were deeply embedded into the fabric of his life. His Jaguar, his luxury watches, his future house, each a statement of success to the outside world. But to the police, they weren't just assets, they were breadcrumbs, and Byrne had left a trail too clear to ignore. For all his careful planning, Byrne saw the silent war closing in. Every message, every move, every false sense of security monitored in real time. His greatest weapon wasn't just failing him, it was turning against him. And then the moment came. But Byrne wasn't running the empire alone. No king rules without a right hand, and just in his world, that man was Beau Devlin. Just as ruthless, just as calculated, just as untouchable, until he wasn't. If Byrne was the strategist, Devlin was the enforcer, the one who helped turn his plans into reality. And together, they built something far bigger than just a narcotics operation. It was a system designed to withstand anything, or so they thought. Beau Devlin wasn't just another player. He was the engine, the architect, the enforcer who turned Byrne's plans into reality. He went by Scalp Cleaner on EncroChat, coordinating shipments, laundering cash, and managing the daily grind of a multi-million-pound operation. If Byrne needed something done, Devlin was the man who made it happen. But Devlin wasn't just taking orders. He understood smuggling routes, evasion tactics, and the risks of the business. His knowledge wasn't accidental. It was built over the years, likely learned alongside Byrne. He even lived in Sevenoaks for a time, staying close to Byrne's base of operations. That wasn't a coincidence. It was a sign of just how deep he was in, and he knew the dangers. He wasn't just careful, he was paranoid. When police raided his home, they found bug detectors, signal jammers, and counter-surveillance gear. Proof that he was always watching, always waiting, always afraid, always checking for a threat he couldn't see. Because in their world, one slip-up didn't mean a fine, it meant prison, or worse. But Devlin and Byrne weren't just traffickers, they were plugged into something bigger. Byrne once bragged that he knew men who had yanked people out of prison vans like they were opening car doors. That kind of power isn't bought, it's built, and it lasts until the day it turns against you. Connections that can keep you safe, until they don't. Because no matter how careful they were, no matter how secure they thought their network was, something was already working against them. And by the time they realised it, it was too late. If you think Byrne and Devlin were the only ones behind this multi-ton narcotic empire, think again. They weren't working alone. Behind the scenes, a network of key players kept the operation running. Traffickers, enforcers, and money launderers, each with a role to play. Now, let's look at the people working in the shadows, the ones who made it all possible. Remember that prison break we mentioned at the start? The daring plan unfolding behind the scenes? Now you know exactly who it was for. Jody Hall. He wasn't just another criminal. He was a firearms supplier, trusted ally, and a key figure in Byrne's operation. But what made Hall so important that Byrne was willing to risk everything to break him out of custody? That's where the story takes another turn. At 51 years old, Hall operated under the alias Unbeaten Moose on EncroChat, moving firearms for Byrne's network. But his role extended beyond just supplying weapons. The very structure of Byrne's empire relied on men like Hall, people who could arm enforcers, keep threats in check, and ensure that no rivals or informant could challenge the operation. And Byrne didn't just sell to Hall, he personally supplied him, reinforcing their deep connection. Then, in July 2020, everything changed. Hall was arrested while collecting a firearm Byrne was moving through another contact. That weapon, it had already been inspected by someone known only as the Boxer. Now, who was that Boxer? A supplier? A broker? An enforcer with more power than anyone realised? No one knows. But one thing is certain. Where his name appeared, violence followed. But the fact that he had handled this very firearm before Hall was caught raises more questions than answers. And whatever his role may have been, his presence in this case was no coincidence. Let's get back to Hall. His arrest wasn't just bad luck. It wasn't random. It was part of something bigger. Operation Eternal. A takedown years in the making. A mission by the Metropolitan Police and the National Crime Agency to bring down the underworld's most powerful players. Authorities had cracked EncroChat, the underworld's digital fortress, a network criminals thought was untouchable. They thought wrong. Hall had no idea he was being watched. Every move, every message, every deal. Then he slipped. A single exchange. A firearm handed off to another man, and just like that, it was over. The buyer? Harry El Arabi. When police stopped El Arabi in Mottingham Lane, South London, they found exactly what they feared. A Glock, silencer attached. 50 rounds of ammunition. More than enough for a massacre. £10,000 in cash. Dirty money, straight from the trade. And in his pocket, the real smoking gun. An EncroChat phone. The message was clear. This wasn't some small-time weapons deal. Not long after, armed officers moved in on Hall. He was also carrying an EncroChat device, a tool of the trade for men who thought they were untouchable. But his real problem wasn't just being caught in the act. It's what police found next. The raid on Hall's home wasn't just routine. It was a gold mine. Stashed in drawers, hidden behind walls, buried in safes, £4,000 in cash. And then, the real prize. 11 kilos of pure product, enough to flood entire streets. But that wasn't all. There was one more stop. The lockup. A hidden garage, the kind used for things that no one wants found. Inside, a revolver, a Beretta, tools of the trade, weapons ready for war. Detective Constable Gio Antoniazzi, the investigating officer, said, "These guns and every individual bullet represented a life that could have been lost or changed forever, and so I'm delighted that we were able to remove them from the streets of London." This confirmed what investigators already suspected. Hall dealt in more than just weapons. He was deep in the narcotic trade, a vital piece of Byrne's network. Now, here's where it all ties back to Byrne. Most criminal bosses would have walked away after an associate was arrested. But Byrne refused to do that. Instead of cutting ties, he set something in motion that few would dare to attempt. A prison break. A full-force ambush. The kind that needed money, connections, and men ruthless enough to pull it off. But the streets had ears. Byrne and his network thought they were operating in the shadows, whispering through encrypted messages, moving pieces on a chessboard only they could see. What they didn't know, someone else was watching. Authorities had already infiltrated Byrne's inner circle. They weren't just tracking shipments anymore. They were reading his plans in real time. And when the messages about the prison break started circulating, the trap was already closing. Whatever Byrne envisaged, a high-speed attack, a violent extraction, a moment of chaos where Hall would vanish into the wind, it never got the chance to happen. The plan unravelled before it could even take shape. Security was tightened, routes were altered, Byrne's men never even got close. And Hall? He was exactly where the police wanted him, locked away. But this was never just about a failed escape. Because even though the van doors never swung open, even though no ambush ever came, the real damage had already been done. Byrne's carefully built empire wasn't just under pressure, it was cracking. Because if Hall, a trusted insider, was caught this easily, how much longer could Byrne and Devlin stay in the shadows? The walls were closing in, and they didn't even know it yet. Hall's days of smuggling and trafficking were over, but his battle wasn't finished. His arrest was only the beginning of a long road through the justice system. He faced court hearings, stood trial, and listened as the weight of evidence stacked against him. And when the verdict came down, it wasn't a surprise. 12 years behind bars. At the same time, his associate, Harry Al-Rabi, was sentenced to 6 years for possession of a firearm, ammunition, and a silencer. Another crucial piece of Byrne's operation gone. But Byrne, he was still out there, still making moves, still convinced he was untouchable. He had no idea how wrong he was. Chris O'Shea operated under the alias All-Star Gin on EncroChat. He was more than just a jeweller in London's renowned Hatton Garden. He was instrumental in laundering the vast proceeds of Byrne's narcotic operations. O'Shea's jewellery business provided the ideal front for converting illicit cash into legitimate assets. Byrne and Devlin relied on O'Shea to transform their profits into gold bars and clean money. This process was not merely about exchanging cash for gold. It involved meticulous planning and execution. Byrne would hand over hundreds of thousands of pounds in cash at a time, receiving gold bars in return, each valued at approximately £40,000. Devlin, Byrne's trusted lieutenant, played a hands-on role in these laundering activities. He coordinated directly with O'Shea, requesting large sums in clean, crisp £20 notes. For instance, Devlin once sought £100,000, agreeing to a 3% commission for O'Shea's services. In January 2024, O'Shea's clandestine operations came to an end. He was arrested and subsequently pleaded guilty to money laundering and narcotics offences, resulting in an 11-year prison sentence. O'Shea's involvement highlights the elaborate measures criminal organisations employ to legitimise their proceeds. His position as a reputable jeweller in Hatton Garden provided the perfect cover, allowing vast sums of dirty money to be washed clean under the guise of legitimate business transactions. Chris O'Shea may have helped clean the money, but moving narcotics and cash undetected requires something just as crucial, a way to transport it without getting caught. That's where the Plugboss came in. A ghost in the system, an expert in deception and the mastermind behind one of the most critical elements of Byrne's operation. But who was he, and how did he manage to stay in the shadows? Let's take a closer look. Unlike Byrne's other associates, the Plugboss wasn't involved in selling illicit substances or laundering money. His speciality was transportation. He was the one that made sure large quantities of narcotics and millions in cash moved undetected. His weapon of choice? Plug cars, vehicles with professionally installed hidden compartments designed to smuggle illegal goods without raising suspicion. For years, these modified vehicles slipped past authorities, carrying tons of shipments across borders and through cities. Without him, Byrne's network would have been crippled, because no matter how much narcotics was imported or how much money was made, if it couldn't move, it couldn't be sold. Byrne was not only moving small shipments, he was dealing in massive quantities. In one message, he told an associate that a lorry driver would be paid £50,000 in cash each to smuggle 250 kilos of narcotics into the UK. But despite the huge payouts, he refused to cover their fuel costs, showing just how calculated he was when it came to maximising profits. Byrne didn't just use the Plugboss's services, he communicated with him directly. EncroChat messages reveal Byrne discussing vehicle modifications, proving just how integral this operation was to the business. In another exchange, messages revealed that Byrne and Devlin paid £3 million for a single 600-kilo shipment of narcotics. Once in the UK, that load would be sold on for a far higher price, proving just how lucrative and large-scale their operation really was. This wasn't just a hired service. This was a trusted relationship. Byrne needed someone who could design undetectable compartments, someone who understood border security, police tactics, and surveillance evasion. The Plugboss was that person. He wasn't just building the cars, he was building the lifelines of the operation. But here's the real question. If Byrne and his network collapsed, why hasn't the Plugboss been caught? Despite his critical role, the Plugboss remains unidentified. While authorities cracked EncroChat, exposing Byrne, Devlin, Hall and O'Shea, the Plugboss was never publicly named or arrested. And that raises an unsettling possibility. Is he still out there? Because if Byrne's empire was built on smuggling and the Plugboss was the man who made it possible, then one thing is clear. Wherever there's a demand, someone like him will always be waiting in the shadows, ready to keep the system running. Now, let's jump towards the last character in that play. Remember the boxer? That name surfaced earlier, linked to the very weapon that led to Jody Hall's arrest. But who was he, and how did he fit into Byrne's empire? That's the mystery. Unlike Byrne, Devlin or Hall, the boxer never stepped into the spotlight. No flashy arrests, no detailed records, just a name, drifting through the encrypted messages, surfacing only when the stakes were high. What we know is this: before Hall was caught collecting the firearm, the boxer had already inspected it. That fact alone raises questions. Was he supplying the weapons, testing them, acting as a middleman? No one knows for sure, but one thing is certain: his presence in the exchanges was no accident. Police uncovered no public identity linked to the boxer, no official charges, no reports of an arrest. It's as if he vanished the moment Byrne's empire collapsed. But does that mean he was never found, or was he never being watched? Because in the world Byrne built, not everyone got caught. Some stayed hidden, some knew when to disappear, and the boxer, he might just have been one of them. Byrne and Devlin had it all: money, power, and a system built to stay hidden. Every move encrypted, every deal carefully planned. For years, no one could touch them. But what if I told you they never anticipated their own downfall? What if, while they were running their empire, someone else was already inside, watching, waiting, setting the perfect trap? Because when this operation collapsed, it was more than just an arrest. It became a takedown so precise, so devastating, that it left even the most connected criminals scrambling. How did it fall apart? And who was the first to crack? Let's get into it. For Byrne and Devlin, trafficking illegal substances was more than just moving the product. It was about engineering a system so flawless that it could run for years undetected. And in early 2020, they put together one of the most ambitious plans yet: a plot to smuggle 5 tons of narcotics from South America into Europe. Their route was carefully chosen. Instead of taking unnecessary risks, they mapped out key entry points, major ports like Antwerp in Belgium and others across the UK. From there, the shipments would be broken down and distributed, ensuring a steady flow of high-purity narcotics into the British market. But getting that much narcotic past border inspections required more than just a solid route. It required deception. So they turned to a tried and tested method. Byrne and Devlin knew customs officials weren't looking for narcotics in fruit shipments, so they planned to hide bricks of narcotics amongst pallets of bananas, making the loads appear harmless to authorities. But they didn't just jump straight into it. They tested the system first. Before sending actual narcotics, they ran dry tests, legitimate shipments containing only bananas. These dummy runs cost them an estimated £300,000, but it was the price they were willing to pay. If authorities saw their company importing only fruit for months, they'd build a record as a legitimate importer, reducing the chances of their real shipment getting flagged. And once everything was in place, the plan was simple. When the time was right, the real shipment, 5 tons of narcotics worth £190 million, would be slipped into the supply chain. If successful, it would have flooded the UK with enough product to fuel the trade of controlled substances for years. But here's the problem. They weren't the only ones watching their operation. Because while Byrne and Devlin thought they were perfecting their smuggling network, the police were already inside it. And by the time they realised what was happening, it was too late. Byrne's empire thrived on secrecy, but the moment he pressed send on what he thought was a private message, he'd already lost. Every shipment he planned, every deal he discussed was being read in real time. And by the time he realised he was no longer talking just to criminals, he was talking to the police. The damage was already done. That moment came in October 2020. The authorities had everything they needed. Every message, every transaction, every move they thought was hidden. And when the time was right, they didn't just arrest them, they wiped out their entire operation in one coordinated hit. Byrne was taken down at his home in Sevenoaks, a place that symbolised his rise to power. Devlin was caught on the same day, possibly close by, possibly even with him. The details of that moment remain unclear. But one thing is certain. When the doors were kicked in, they never saw it coming. Inside Byrne's home, evidence of his empire was everywhere. Stashed cash, incriminating bank records, and a lavish construction project meant to cement his success. All of it became worthless. But the most damning piece, his EncroChat phone. The device that had once made him feel untouchable was now the single biggest piece of evidence against him. The operation didn't stop there. Byrne was more than just living well, he was expanding. His empire was so profitable that he'd started building a high-end house right next door, a symbol of how much he had made, a monument to a kingdom that was now collapsing in real time. But it wasn't just about Byrne. His influence ran deep. When police raided his girlfriend's apartment, they had to breach a reinforced door. Byrne had been investing in fortifying his safe houses, knowing that one day someone might come knocking. Inside, more wealth, designer clothes, brochures for luxury villas in Portugal, plans for a future that would never happen. Even his family didn't remain untouched. At his parents' home, police uncovered a taser weapon and documents in Devlin's name hidden away. Evidence that their reach extended far beyond just the two of them. Devlin's own residence in Weald Road, Sevenoaks, told its own story. CS spray for self-defence, a bug detector to check for surveillance, £5,000 in cash, expensive shoes, designer clothing and luxury jewellery. But all of it, the money, the power, the protection, meant nothing now. Because the real victory for police was more than just arresting Byrne and Devlin. It was stopping their shipments before they even reached the UK. They'd planned to move 5 tons of narcotics worth £190 million using a supply chain they thought was unbreakable. But Byrne and Devlin were never in control. From the moment EncroChat was cracked, their fate was sealed. The empire they had spent years building collapsed in a single day. The takedown was swift. Their empire was gone. But Byrne and Devlin still had one final battle, the courtroom. And this time, there was no escape. After their October 2020 arrests, both men faced a mountain of evidence, a case built almost entirely from EncroChat messages that laid bare their entire operation. There was no way to deny it. Every deal, every plan, every shipment, it was all there, in their own words. The prosecution wasn't holding back. Both Byrne and Devlin were charged with conspiracy to import Class A narcotics and money laundering. But Byrne's criminal reach extended even further. He also faced firearms charges and the prison break plot, as messages revealed he had planned to arm a team to storm a prison van. It wasn't just about narcotics, it was about control, power, and a criminal network that spanned continents. The courtroom heard how, from March to June 2020, they planned to flood the UK with narcotics, using gold and offshore accounts to wash their money clean. And now, it was all coming back to haunt them. Then came the moment of surrender. Initially, both men were held in custody with no chance of bail. There was no running now. And, as the prosecution built their case, the weight of the evidence became impossible to ignore. Byrne and Devlin had a choice. Fight a trial they were guaranteed to lose, or cut their losses. On January the 9th, 2025 at Maidstone Crown Court, they made their decision. Both pleaded guilty. The evidence was overwhelming. The encrypted messages, the seized cash, the gold. There was no way out. By pleading guilty, they avoided a long public trial, but it wasn't out of remorse. It was survival. Some charges, including Byrne's firearm offences, were left on file, meaning that they weren't pursued, but could be reopened if needed. Not that it matters. Byrne and Devlin were about to disappear for decades. On the 7th of March 2025, the final chapter unfolded. In the courtroom, the full scope of their crimes was revealed. Prosecutors read out excerpts from Byrne's own messages, including his chilling offer to break an associate out of custody. "I've got a few bods who will do it, and have done it before." That line alone was enough to prove the danger that Byrne posed to the police and the justice system. Their defence team tried to soften the blow. They pointed out that no narcotics shipment had actually landed in the UK, arguing that the harm was in planning rather than execution. But there was no room for leniency. This wasn't some failed scheme. This was a high-level international narcotics conspiracy. The judge didn't hold back. He called it a highly sophisticated and organised criminal network, and made it clear that their punishment had to reflect the damage their operation could have caused. Andrew Tickner, NCA operations manager from the OCP, said, "They were responsible for flooding the UK street with enormous quantities of narcotics via their contacts for onward sale, laundering the profits via gold and expensive watches." Matthew Byrne was sentenced to 21 years and 6 months. Beau Devlin got 17 years. Byrne, as the ringleader, took the harsher sentence. His prison break plot, arms deals and sheer influence in the underworld made him too dangerous for anything less. Devlin, though slightly lower in rank, still received a crushing 17-year prison term, a clear warning that even logistics men in the narcotic empire would pay the price. As the sentences were handed down, neither man said a word. Byrne sat stone-faced, a man who once lived in luxury, now staring down 2 decades in a high-security prison. Devlin, the younger of the two, showed visible emotion, realising that by the time he walked free, he'd be in his late 40s. During sentencing, the Crown presented the key evidence that left no room for doubt. The jury heard about the intercepted EncroChat messages, mapping out every shipment, every cash drop, every deal. The seized cash and gold, with a photograph of gold bars found on Byrne's phone, proof of the laundering operation. The scale of the planned narcotics shipments, 5 tons, worth £190 million, enough to fuel addiction and violence on a massive scale. The judge was blunt. It didn't matter that the shipments never arrived. The harm they intended was more than enough to justify the punishment. And, as part of Operation Venetic, this case proved that even criminals using advanced encryption couldn't outrun the law. Byrne and Devlin weren't just sent to prison, their fortunes would be stripped away. Under the Proceeds of Crime Act, financial confiscation proceedings would follow, aimed at seizing their remaining assets, cash, luxury cars, gold, anything linked to their crimes. The message was clear: crime doesn't pay. Not anymore. The courtroom doors closed. The case was over. Byrne and Devlin had spent years building an empire. Now, they would spend decades watching it rot from behind bars.